What's up, boys? This season's Fathers of the Future podcast is brought to you by ScottsdalePodcast.com. It's the studio that I'm in right now. Here's the deal. If you have a story, if you have a mission, if you have an interview, if you have something deep and meaningful in your heart that you need to share, that you need to get out, that you need to promote, that you need to fundraise, that you need to build, let ScottsdalePodcast.com be the place that you can come. Welcome back to the Fathers of the Future podcast. My name is Luke Kayam. I am joined by a lifelong brother, as most of the guests on this show are, Alex Herrera.
Let's go. What's up, Luke? How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Welcome. We've talked about this for a while as evolving and expanding your digital footprint. I asked you on the pre-show, have you done a podcast before? And you said, yeah, you did one in the industry that you're well versed in, which is solar, and there will be a time and a space for that. But like what I love to do more than anything is get to the real, the raw, the actionable part of how you got here. Because most people today don't know that version or that model of you. I do. We've talked about it for years. You know, we're definitely cut from the same cloth. We did not grow up in North Scottsdale. We did not drive Teslas and fancy BMWs. We both had challenges growing up in our younger years. We both have faced different addictions and different sedations and different challenges and problems that for the most part were all self-induced. And so before we get into the now and this version of you, I want to go back. I want to go back to where you were brought up, where you grew up, and ultimately how you started screwing up and what age was that, and that path that led you into some extremely hard challenges to ultimately give you not just the LGS, like we call it, legalized gangster shit, but
Right.
or even the street cred, but like the frame for why you are who you are today, right? Those times and experiences that we went through in our past that were not as glorious, they were not as God-filled, they were not as powerful and positive as they are now, truly do build the foundation for who you've become. And so take us back to 14, 15-year-old Alex and
Wow.
and where you're at and what you're doing, and kind of give us that next 10-year timeline or even 15.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Back to 14. Back to 14. Eddie Maiden came to life right there, man. So I went to Monsters of Rock when I was 14 years old in Houston, Texas. I was born and raised in Laredo, lived in Laredo pretty much all the way up to the age of about, I'd say 20, 22, 23. Yeah, 14 was Monsters of Rocks. I actually snuck out of the house for that concert. I sure did. It was an awesome concert, man. Some of the top bands back then, you know, you had Metallica, Def Leppard, you had Scorpions, AC/DC. Man, there was like four other bands. I think Megadeth was there as well. And anyway, and I ended up with Eddie Maiden on my arm on Westheimer Street, man, late night. Got home and took the biggest beating I ever took the next day, man. I think my dad tried to beat the tattoo off my arm, you know. So from there, you know, I've always been in that lifestyle. I was always a rebel. I was firstborn, you know, and I was always a rebel. My parents, my mom's full Puerto Rican, so just in that culture alone, you know, it's just loud. It's obnoxious sometimes. It's fun, you know, but when, I don't know how many Puerto Ricans you know, but when they get pissed off, they get pretty pissed off, you know. So my dad's Hispanic from deep Mexico, deep roots in Mexico. He comes from a family of 16 brothers and sisters. So the upbringing, you know, during that time was a lot of barbecues, a lot of fun with my uncles and stuff like that. Really, my grandmother was the one that kept the foundation of the whole family always getting together, you know, and stuff like that.
A lot of drinking too.
A lot of drinking at a very young age too, because My uncles are machismos, right? And my grandfather, rest in peace, obviously, and he owned a big, like a couple of blocks in Mexico. He was a gynecologist, and he owned a couple of big blocks in Mexico. So the family lived around this huge, kind of like everybody's house was all around it. It was almost like a fort, and in the middle of the fort was this big playing ground. And that's where we would all get together, barbecue, stuff like that every Sunday, man, every Sunday. And my uncles used to make us put on the boxing gloves, and they'd get drunk and they'd want to watch us fight, and stuff like that. And it was that kind of upbringing, right? And it just, even though it's all fun and games, it turns you into a different person, because when you put the boxing gloves on, especially at age 12, 10, 12, and you get hit, you get pissed off, right? So, I mean, at least I did, so, and it just, it built something else in me that made me become more alpha, which actually ended up stabbing me in the back, because then I think I put on that pit bull collar and started rebelling against my parents, so that started happening around the age of 15. I was threatening to drop out of school. I didn't like school. The only reason I was in school was because I was selling a bunch of weed, selling a bunch of drugs, stuff like that. And so I always had money in my pocket at a young age, and it was because of that, right? And nothing that I'm proud of, but also nothing that I don't regret to this day, right? And
or are ashamed of, because it's part of who you are, and because you live a different life now, you can look back on it and realize, man, that maybe that was the foundation for my entrepreneurship. Now that you don't drink and do drugs, it's kind of,
put your strength elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. So at age 16, man, my head was drop out of school, right? And I did. At age 16, I dropped out of school, got into a huge fight with my mom, and she basically gave me the boot. She said to me, if you think you're man enough to drop out of school and to go do your own thing, then get the F out, right? And so I did. I got out, and I left the house at 16 years old. I left to Houston, Texas, and I never looked back. And of course, no money, and my dad was, even though my dad is always the big-hearted, I think that's where I get that from. Actually, I know that's where I get that from. My dad's the big-hearted, let me take care of you, let me do whatever it is you need, you need. He had a choice to make, right? And his choice, my mom literally put it in his face and said, it's either me or him. And it was one of those, right? And at the time, because of who I was, because of how I was rebelling, I really wasn't paying attention to the in-between. I wasn't really paying attention to what my dad was going through, and it was all about me, right? And I always felt like, at the time, I didn't care, right? I was like, so I bugged out. So I leave to Houston, Texas, and I live in the streets for 2 years. So literally in the streets. So 17 and 18, did stay at a couple of apartments with people that I would meet and become acquaintance with. Obviously, I had to survive. So it put me into the world that I already knew, and I was not necessarily coming out of, but I guess at the time becoming better at, and which was the drug world. And I got deeper and deeper into drugs, not only using drugs, but also selling drugs, to keep up my habits, stuff like that, and which were all bad habits, and one thing led to another in that lifestyle. I don't know how many of you have lived that whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and it's probably a lot of you out there, but I literally lived the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and
how slippery was the slope from the time you went to the concert at 14 and got, kicked out of your parents' house? What is that timeline of rock bottom?
Rock bottom was literally when I hit Houston, Texas. I left the house with $120 in my pocket. That's what I had. And That was it, man. The shirt on my back. I took a backpack. I had a little bit, couple of change of clothes. I was hitting the truck stops to take a shower once a week, so it wasn't a shower every day. And I ate on the streets. I dug through some trash cans, and I also I would walk into McDonald's, Burger King, stuff like that, and especially late at night when they're about to close, they got all those leftovers, so they're like throwing them away pretty much. So I'd walk in there knowing that it was about closing time, and I'd capitalize on a few burgers or whatever. So then I'd throw them in the backpack, and I'd have lunch for the next couple of days. So it was that kind of a lifestyle.
Did you know what you were doing was not right? Not that it was wrong. There's a difference. But did you know that it wasn't like right? Like, do you remember looking back, feeling that in your gut, like, man, this is not what I'm supposed to be doing? Or were you blinded by just all of it?
It was fast. It was fast life, and I'm sure you've been there as well. Maybe not to the level that I've been there, maybe so, but when you hit that big city, it sucks you in and spits you right out. And Houston, Texas is that. If you can't control yourself and what you're doing in a city like that, it will suck you up and spit you out, and not in a good way either. It hit me after a little while. I'd say probably maybe 4 to 6 months in. What really hit me and what stayed with me for a long time was that nobody came looking. Nobody came looking for me, meaning my parents, right? Like I didn't hear from my dad. I had family in Houston that I approached their front door to stay, and they shut the door on me, and it was just, yeah, it was a difficult time. It really was a difficult time in my life.
So you hit 18, those 2 years, 17, 18,
Yeah.
you're out, you're on the streets.
Yep.
And then what does that next 5 to 10 years actually look like and become?
So I met Gene Cannon in Houston, Texas. His dad was a fire chief for in Houston. I think it was for the city of Woodlands. He was in the Woodlands. Gene came from money. He had that lifestyle. He was actually one of my customers that I used to sell drugs to. So because he had money, there was always a lot of movement of drugs. But he was in the oil fields, and he was working for Transamerica at the time. And we were young, man. I mean, we were 18, 19 years old. And that was basically one of my first jobs. Well, no, my first job. I did flip burgers at McDonald's there for a little while. And in the interim, I met Gene, and he mentioned to me that if I could stay clean and get off the drugs, not smoking weed, and stop messing around with the cocaine, stuff like that, that he could potentially place me in the oil fields. And that's how I started in the oil field world. So I left the drugs. I didn't stop selling them, but I stopped using them. And I was so deep involved in that world that I couldn't just turn it off. It was kind of like blood in, blood out, and it was one of those lifestyles. And because of the people that I surrounded myself with, you just couldn't leave. It just wasn't like that.
But you're also learning both sides of the table, both sides of the house, right? The drug selling, cash flow, illegal side of.
I really started learning the cash flow when I stopped using. Mm-hmm. That's when it took me a little bit, because obviously it took a little while to detox. And it takes a little while to kind of get the flow in your head and your mind itself. To acknowledge the fact that, I have something real going on here. It's not just about, let me make the money and pay the girls, right? Or let's party or this or that, right? It's let me make the money and start saving the money so that I start creating a future for myself. So it kind of started settling into a different format, if you will. Yeah.
And how long are you in that before the next Big break or big drop?
I stayed in the oil fields for till the age, well, not probably, till the age of 20, 24, 25, right in there. And I moved back to Laredo. And I moved back to Laredo because the drug world was getting bigger and bigger. And the crowd that I surrounded myself with and needed me as an let's call it an employee, right, or a soldier. Needed me as a soldier in Laredo, so I moved back to Laredo for that purpose. And still, my parents didn't know I was in Laredo, and they were still there. Nobody knew that I was back, and I was wheeling and dealing drugs, still working the oil fields as well. In the oil fields, started off as a roughneck, got all the way up to a derrick hand, and I worked the derricks for probably about 2 years on the backside, and then I was hired on by Dow Schlumberger. They're a company that does casing, cementing, and fracking of the oil wells and stuff like that, and they needed personnel. And they some of the guys were poaching on the rigs and stuff, looking for good employees, and that's how I started off with Dow Schlumberger. In the interim, I met my first wife, Gina, and we had a baby together. We had Terry Gina. Terry Gina was born at the age of 22. I was 22 when she was born, so that whole time, 19 through 24, 25. I was in Laredo and working the oil fields, dealing drugs, kind of thinking that I was gonna get married and raise a family and stuff, and I just wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for that, and that's the reason why Gina and I kind of fell apart. She was looking for something different.
And what becomes your next or your first rock bottom, and then when is the pivot or the shift? Your first big one.
The first rock bottom, I was 27, and Gina and I were breaking up, and I was pretty big in the drug world at that time, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I had a pit bull in the backyard, and I chained him to the money, buried the money, and I literally chained the dog to the money, and Gina and I were falling apart, and when I left there, I got in a really dark spot. I started using again, and Gina wanted to she was pushing on the let's get married thing, and it wasn't for me, and I just wasn't ready, and I left everything, and I left again with the backpack on my back. And I left everything. I left my daughter. I left Gina. This time my parents were in San Antonio, Texas, and I did call my dad, and I asked him if he would open his doors to me. That I just needed some time because I needed to get away from what was happening in Laredo. I figured out of sight, out of mind, right? So I just needed that space, and I didn't have anywhere to run, because everywhere I ran, of where I knew, of where I'd been, I would just end up falling right back into that hole, So my dad opened his doors to me, and he set some boundaries, he set some rules, and of course I abide by the rules, I abide by the boundaries. But it wasn't very long after, because of the habits and who I was, that it doesn't matter where you go, you always bring you with you. So, and that's one thing that I learned in time. So I just want to, tell you guys out there that, again, if sometimes you think that you want to go to another city or something like that to start new, but always remember, if you don't start new within yourself and within your mind and within your heart, then you're really not ever starting new, regardless of where you're at. Right? So
we used to say that in Maui a lot. Are you running to or running from? When people came to Maui, right? It's one or the other.
Right, right. Uh-huh. I said that to my boy Tristan. That's another story, but I said that to him when he moved in to my house before he went to the Coast Guard. But anyway, so I went to San Antonio, and I brought me with me. and so it wasn't long, man, before there was a lot more money in San Antonio than there was in Laredo, right? Mm-hmm. And that kind of was like, bing. I was like, wow, like, okay, like this is a lot easier. It's a bigger city. Nobody knows me here. It's going to take a minute before anybody catches up to me, that kind of stuff, right? So during that minute, I'm flipping Benjamins, right? And there goes that lifestyle starting up all over again.
If you look back at that time, were you running a team or were you a one-man army?
I was running a team. Well, I started off as a one-man army in San Antonio.
Yeah.
And then I brought me with me. Mm-hmm. So the people that I knew from Laredo, that I knew from Houston, this whole gang banging lifestyle, was also in San Antonio. Mm-hmm. So it was a matter of time before, hey, Alex is here. What are we going to do with him? Let's put him to work. So
as crazy as this sounds, can you look back on that time and that role and see early leadership in what you were doing?
I do now.
Yeah, of course.
Good point. Good point. Yeah. I do now. Of course, I didn't then, right? I mean, then it was just go with the flow, so, but yeah, it's a good point. I do. And I did. I had a team. I got to a point where I had a team under me. And, I would, of course, my dad, hey, if you're going to go back into that lifestyle, then you need to get out, right? So I had to respect that. But by that time that he caught on, I hate to say it that way, but by the time he caught on, I had money. So, of course, now I have 2 or 3 apartments in San Antonio because I'm bouncing from one to the other, trying to be incognito, right? So different cars. Different apartments, different girls, everybody working, right?
And your, let's call it life rock bottom, right? Comes when and where. And again, I'm going to keep kind of grinding home that idea around the pivot.
Yeah.
Or the upswing.
Yeah.
Or the even just transformation, because you've had a few.
Yeah. Well, and this, let's go back to Houston, back to 16 years old. During that time, bad decisions come with consequences, right? So those consequences led to jail time, prison time. So been there, done that, in and out of prisons. And sometimes it was overnighters. Sometimes it was a couple of months at a time. Sometimes the last one was rock bottom. That was more in my 30s, where I did a 3-year, a 5-year stint, got out in 3. That's one. That one was rock bottom.
And if I could pause just for a second. Knowing who you are now, and we're going to have to get into this piece, okay? It's not all about your past version self, but knowing who you are now, the investment in personal and professional development, the work that you do, the entrepreneurship, the companies that you run. When somebody hears that doesn't know or doesn't come from that, they might, freak out a little bit. I respect and value it because of who you are now, not because of who you were then. And so I'll be careful with saying I love it, but when I hear that story, like I didn't know anything like that about you when you were a member of our CrossFit gym, 15 years ago. I just knew, you were a good dude, and that's all that mattered, right? But when you start to unpack that past from somebody, especially here in this demographic, right? People, we look different, right? We don't look like everybody else around here, but we're a lot of that same person with our new core values, with our new integrity, with our new faith, right? It's like going back home to Palm Springs. You can take me out of Palm Springs, but you can't never take Palm Springs out of me, right?
Yeah.
There are those parts of you that will never leave you. Drug dealing, done, right?
Yeah.
All the other things that came with that, done. Never again. That's a part of my past you never, ever, ever, ever have to worry about again. But the part that made you a leader, the part that made you tough, that grit, that intensity, right? All those things that made you good at what you were doing back then is still with you, that makes you great at what you're doing now. And you can never forget where you come from, because that's the beginning of repeating an old pattern, you know?
Right.
So you got jail, prison, right? That long stint, you got out. First big shift, like day one, you're out, and all of a sudden you're this new man? No.
No.
Right? So,
No.
so what is that series of things that kind of come after until you get into your first, or until you get out here and you get into your first company,
Yeah.
which I'm a customer of, Air Park Auto Clinic.
Yeah.
And so give us that sort of next timeline.
So, so going back to age 27 was the first time I went to jail for a significant amount of time. At this time, I was with my ex-wife, which is the mother of my three boys, Alex, Tristan, and Nicholas. And as she put up with a lot of stuff. I do have to say, I put that woman through hell, man. And there's sometimes, there's some things that you regret in life, and that's one of them, and she didn't deserve that. Good woman. And so she put up with my in and out of jails. We had money because I was in that drug world, and we were in San Antonio, living in San Antonio. And through the drug money, I was able to acquire my first companies in San Antonio, Texas. So I bought a franchise my first franchise was Gene Brown Transmissions. I come from that background of a mechanic world, and it was just bred in me, I guess, because I really never went to school for it. I just one day decided to pick up a wrench and realized that I was good at it, and so I opened up the Gene Brown. From there, I opened up another franchise, Meineke, and then I closed Gene Brown. I had Meineke and Midas, so I had two competitive automotive shops in San Antonio competing against each other, and that was a fun time because it allowed me to, even though I utilized dirty money, so to speak, which is nothing that I'm proud of, but I mean, it was what it was. It was the only money I had, So even though I utilized that, I used it to better and to serve, and I started serving. Right, I started serving people, helping people with their automotive problems, issues, things like that. And I really started digging deep into really helping individuals because, you get a lot of people out there that don't know anything about mechanics, don't know anything about, especially women, and they get taken advantage of, and that the mechanic world's got that MO. So I never wanted to be that. I've always been the type of person that I'll take the shirt off my back to help anyone, especially if I see potential.
All money's dirty, by the way. It's what you do with it that's either clean or dirty. Right? All of it.
Yeah,
right?
I guess you're right. Yeah. I guess you're right. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, that could go all the way into politics nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's funny. So then so Natalie's putting up with all my stuff. I fall into jail one last time. It wasn't that I fell into jail. It was that all my past transgressions, everything that I'd been through, had all piled up on me. The arrests, it got to a point that I was burnt in San Antonio. It didn't matter what corner I turned. It was the cops were right behind me no matter what, stopping me at every corner, checking me. So it got to where I never carried anything with me. No guns, no drugs, no nothing, because I knew I was going to get stopped. It got to a point where it didn't matter what I was driving. They knew. They had me pinned, and it started really getting bad because I was starting to eat through the finances, which led me to open up the Midas and Meineke because the finances were going away. So, and I couldn't continue that lifestyle because I knew that the final consequence was going to be prison. And the bottom line was, how big was prison going to be? Did I want to get caught with kilos? Did I want to get caught with a gram or something? Right. So it was, what am I facing here? What corner do I need to turn? So the last stint I did, I was 33, 33, going on 34 years old, and I actually turned myself in. I knew that all I had to pay my dues, and in order for me to start new, I knew that I had to, to get that monkey off my back. So I literally went to court, and I stood in front of the judge, and she wanted to give me 5 years plus parole. And I said to her, everyone fails on parole. 9 times out of 10, you fail parole. You fail probation. I'm telling you that I will give you 5 years straight if you want me to. But when I'm done, I'm done. I don't want any more paper. I don't want nothing to follow me. I'm done because I'm done with this lifestyle.
Wow.
And she stood up on that pulpit, man, and she stood up and looked at me and said, "This is the last time I better see you in my court. If I see you in my court again, I'm throwing the book at you." And I signed the papers on a 5-year term. I got out at 37. By that time, Natalie was gone.
Forget institutionalized for a moment, which most people will never understand what that is or what that means. When you were in there, did you have that feeling in your heart? So like I judge character for a living, right? And I'll be careful with judge. I read character for a living, right? And I help modify and shift and upgrade that character to become greater. And so I know what it was like when I wasn't living my best life because of how I felt. It weighed on me. I knew God had a calling on my life greater than the life that I was living. And that's what affected me the most in those moments, whether I got caught or got in trouble or not. I knew I was supposed to be doing something better. Can you recall, or do you remember that time when you were in there of like, again, looking at where you are now, right? You were eating burgers out of a backpack. I know how you eat now.
Yeah.
And it ain't burgers and it ain't out of a backpack, right?
Right.
And so just, again, man, looking back, looking in that rear view for a minute, do you remember that feeling of what it felt like when you were not living your best life?
It was just a lot of emptiness. There was a lot of emptiness and a lot of darkness, and even though, of course, when people hit jail, whether it's overnight or months at a time, they somehow they seem to find God, right? Everybody seems to find God in jail. And I did too, right? I found him in jail, and I was saved in 1992. But from 92 throughout, I'm a sinner, right? And I always, I was in and out of love with God. Sometimes I'd reach out to him every once in a while, only when I needed him, literally. I would reach out to him only when I needed him, so to answer your question, a lot of emptiness, a lot of darkness, especially the last one, because it was my longest term, and there were no phones. It was all letters and mail. I was in state, so state's a little different. When you're in county, you got phones. When you're in federal, you probably have a cell phone. In state, you don't have none of that. So it was hard for the boy's mom, for Natalie as well during that time. And she packed up her stuff. The only people that she knew that she had at the time was her. Well, my parents were taking care of her and the boys in San Antonio while they were still there, but she needed a life too. You know what I mean? So I did get that Dear John letter, and when I got the Dear John letter, man, it was that hit home. That hit home because I knew that I still had a year and a half to go, at best, So.
And how old were the boys at that time in your life during that 3 years?
Nico was a baby. Nico was probably about baby months. Tristan 2, 3, Baba 4, 5-ish. Yeah.
So you missed some good years, but not all the good years.
I missed some good years. Yeah, I did. So then when I got out at 37, she was already here in Arizona because she had established jurisdiction for the boys here. So I didn't think she thought that I would follow. And obviously she probably didn't want me to, because she knew the lifestyle that I was living before I went to jail. So she, even though I had said many a times before in the past to her, that I was going to change my ways, and I never did. You know what I mean? So this last stint in jail, I changed my ways. When I got out, I turned back to those. I call them the pearly gates, even though they're not, right? But they were my judgment days, right? And I turned around and looked at those gates, and I made a promise to myself that I would never live a lie again, and I would never come back to prison again. So, and yeah, man.
Okay, great. So that gets us to now, or at least gets you through the fire, right?
Yeah.
The forge of transformation, the crucible that has, changed and shaped the way that you live now. Let's get into this entrepreneurial journey, because when I first met you at my CrossFit gym on 83rd Place, the CrossFit Scottsdale, you were first launching, running, and even working as a mechanic at your shop.
Yeah.
And Air Park Auto Clinic had just been around for a few years. You're running, you're managing that shop, very successful here in Scottsdale. We call it Shameless self-promotion, but Air Park Auto Clinic. I've had my 4Runner, my Tundra, and my Bronco there in the past couple months. But you're not running and operating that alone. And so what I really want to get into is this entrepreneurial mindset in not just solar, because I think that does play a significant part in what you're doing, and this industry that you've learned, right? And we're not talking door-to-door solar sales, okay? We're talking farms, right? We're talking land, we're talking energy, we're talking water. Like, you're in the depth of building energy.
I am.
Yeah. So how did that even begin? And what is that like right now, learning it and being in some of these rooms with some very well-educated people who have been doing solar? How do you establish yourself and your credibility with confidence, doing what you're doing?
I always assume consent when I walk into a room. Not to sound pompous or anything like that, but I just do. I feel that I've earned that badge of honor to hold my head high, regardless of who's in the room, and that I am good enough to sit next to millionaires and make these deals, right? So I always walk into the room knowing that I'm going to close the deal. I started in the whole solar industry in 2019, and it was a fluke. I mean, I actually was doing another entrepreneuring business. I was working with a gentleman that he would sell products online, just an e-commerce business, and I was helping him do that. And I was doing sales, kind of not door to door, but sales, a lot of sales online, and to the point to where the phone would ring and people would want me to go speak in front of people on these sales, on this e-commerce business that we were doing. One of the gentlemen that wanted us to speak was in El Paso, Texas. His name is, oh my God, I can't remember his name. Anyway, first name Peter, but Peter Lopez. Him and his partner, Humberto Lopez, great guys, young guys, but great guys. They run Minsky now, and multi-millionaires. Young guys too, like early 30s millionaires, And so I went to pitch them on this e-commerce business, and they were selling solar at the time for one of some of the biggest companies out there, which was Titan, Eris Energy, Palmetto, stuff like that. And when we went to dinner, I did pitch them on the stuff that that we were selling. They did purchase, and at the same time we went to dinner, got to know them a little bit more, and they started sharing with me the sizable commissions that they were making. So I realized that I was in the wrong field of e-commerce business, because this is also somewhat of an e-commerce business, because it's also somewhat of online sales. So I jumped on their shirt tail and I started selling solar. I opened the first solar company, which was Atom Energy, and I followed suit. I was selling solar for Titan, for Palmetto, stuff like that, making great commission. So then one thing led to another. I just opened my mind to opening up an installation company. I realized the amount of tax credits that were involved in solar projects. I realized that the bigger you build them, the bigger the money, the bigger the tax credits, the bigger the money, so, and I wanted a part of that world, and I wasn't going to stop until I got there, so I've been creating solar farms nationwide, and big resort projects. Some of these parking structures that you see at churches and stuff like that, some of those are us. And I started dabbling in that world in a much larger scale, which is actually a lot easier than doing it at a lower scale, because I learned a long time ago that it's easier to ask for bigger money than it is for smaller money. So that's, that was the drive.
That's the entrepreneurial tip right there.
That
right?
is the entrepreneurial tip.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's easier to ask for bigger money than it is to ask for smaller money.
Yeah. Plus your quantity versus quality mindset, whales versus minnows.
Yeah.
There's a lot in that, in anything you're doing. Fundraising, for example, right? Might be easier to, find 10 guys to give 1,000 than 100 guys to give 100.
Right. Right.
So just a totally different mindset. And so that's what you're doing now, and I believe this is the next phase, next evolution. I don't see you going to be in this forever. I feel like you're going to be on to that next sort of big thing. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, from an investment standpoint, what I want to, kind of wrap up in this last piece here. Talk a lot about investing in self, especially as a coach, right? I spend X amount of dollars per month, per year on coaches, classes, courses. I'm constantly refining. Like you, I don't have a college education. My education has come from experience. And a quote that I crafted earlier this year is, information is free, education is expensive, and experience is priceless. And so the investment in self truly does establish you, not just from a confidence level, but from the understanding that, you've gone through this thing, right? Every hard mental challenge I ever signed up for and paid for, from, SEAL Fit to 24-hour, obstacle course races, they all come with an investment. They all come with a cost. We've been working together for this year. You're also invested in the John Madsen training program, which a lot of guys see the ads out there on getting ripped by the end of summer. And you've been on the path of both, life coaching and high-level fitness coaching. What would you say to your 25-year-old self? Okay, so instead of this to your son or to your grandson or to your future self, what would you say to that 25-year-old self? Because as a fitness coach, being in the industry, when I was personal training, when I was grinding, when I was hustling, when I was running gyms, I was not invested in my growth. I was invested in my work, and that work would produce fruit, but I wasn't growing the how-to fruit or the how-to farm to get better fruit.
Right.
And it's been a game changer ever since. So what would you say to that guy, or even that guy out there who's resistant to hiring a coach, or, investing in their self to do something or learn something that they never have before?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If I had to, I would say that don't wait. Don't wait to get started. Obviously, it's never too late to get started, because I waited, right? And I really didn't get started in my physical and mental change until around the age of 47. I really started looking at it, looking for longevity, looking to get healthy. And then I'm 55 now, and in my early 50s was when I really started making the change. And I would say don't wait, because the longer you wait, the harder it is, to be quite honest. It just is. It's a lot harder to get it going. And if you're the type of person that lacks motivation, lacks discipline, then it's even harder, right? So if you're in that position now, whether you're age 20, 25, 30, I would definitely start now. And know that it takes good leadership. It takes good coaches and good leadership to be and become a good leader. I am part of the Superhuman elite team, and I'm super proud of that. That's led by John Madsen, and you do see this guy online saying, if you don't make $150,000 or more, then don't call me. There's a reason behind that. It's not a scam. It's not that he's trying to do something weird. It's just that he wants to know that you're serious, right? Because if you're not serious, then you wouldn't put that kind of money down. At least I wouldn't. But it takes good leaders to lead other men and to lead other leaders. And we all need those coaches. We all need someone looking from outside the box. So I'm super thankful to have you in my life. I really am. You're right there with the elite, and you are one of my top coaches. So I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for people like yourself.
I appreciate that. And at 55, the evolution of business to me, right? Because I get this a lot from guys. It's like, yeah, well, I haven't made $1 million yet, or I haven't hit it yet, and they're 38, and they're 45, and they're 52. If you keep working and you keep grinding and you keep evolving and you stop being comfortable with being comfortable, things will continue to happen for you, not to you. And so again, if you look back 10 years ago, I'm a personal trainer, you're a mechanic.
Right.
And now you fast forward, well, imagine where we're going to be 10 years from now. And I think that's the most important lesson that we can share from this conversation today is you can't let your past define you. You can't erase it, but you can't let it define you. And wherever you are right now, that's not going to be where you want to be if you set intentions, if you follow through on your tasks, and if you get surrounded by great people. And that's what it comes down to, is like, what room are you in? If you're in the same room getting the same information day in and day out, you're going to be where you were. You have to get into other rooms. You have to go places where other people are doing things that you're not. And a lot of that has to either be physical or financial. Because if you're the strongest dude in the gym, you're in the wrong gym. And if you're the richest dude in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Right. Absolutely.
My name is Luke Kayam. This is Alex Herrera. Thank you for being a part of the Fathers of the Future podcast. We'll see you soon.
Awesome.
So check out ScottsdalePodcast.com and reach out to my man Martin to build your podcast now.